So you want to own a data center. It sounds like the easiest windfall in tech right now. Hyperscalers dumping hundreds of billions into infrastructure, AI demand that never seems to peak. Here's what nobody tells you before you sign the lease. This is one of the most capital-intensive, operationally brutal, and ruthlessly competitive businesses you can enter. And the customers you need most are increasingly building their own facilities and cutting you out entirely. By the end of this video, you will understand exactly how data centers make money, why most of the revenue in this industry concentrates in a small number of very large players, what the real economics look like once you factor in power, cooling, debt service, and staffing, and why the AI boom that looks like a rising tide is actually accelerating a consolidation that makes it harder than ever for a new operator to compete. A small edge data center, which is a facility positioned close to end users to reduce the distance data has to travel, serving a regional market, handling localized cloud workloads, or supporting enterprise clients who need low latency processing nearby, runs between $10 and $50 million to build from scratch. A mid-tier facility in a major metropolitan market with meaningful capacity, think 10 to 20 megawatts of IT load, which is the actual power consumed by computing equipment as distinct from cooling and facility systems, costs somewhere between $100 and $300 million. A hyperscale campus, the type being constructed right now by companies like Microsoft, Amazon, and Google, which operate internet infrastructure at a scale most businesses cannot approach, regularly exceeds $1 billion per facility. Some planned campuses are running into the multiple billions before a single server ever powers on. And here's the thing that catches most people off guard. The building itself is often the cheaper part. Power infrastructure is where the real money goes. Every data center runs on electricity. Not a little electricity, a lot of electricity. A 100 megawatt facility consumes roughly the same amount of power as a small city. Getting that power to a site requires utility-grade electrical infrastructure, high voltage transformers, switchgear, which is the equipment that controls and protects incoming high voltage power before it reaches the facility, redundant feeds from the grid, backup generators with enough diesel capacity to run the facility for days during an outage, and uninterruptible power supply systems that bridge the gap between a grid failure and the generators coming online. That electrical infrastructure alone can represent 30 to 40% of total construction cost. Then there's cooling. Servers generate enormous amounts of heat. Managing that heat is an engineering problem with no cheap solution. Traditional air-based cooling systems, the raised floor computer room air conditioners that filled facilities for decades, are being strained to their limits by modern high-density compute racks. The AI chips powering large language models and neural network training, units like NVIDIA's GPU clusters, can consume 30 to 100 kilowatts per rack or more. That's thermal output that air cooling struggles to handle efficiently. Liquid cooling systems, direct chip cooling, and immersion cooling are becoming necessary for cutting-edge deployments, and none of those are inexpensive retrofits. Cooling systems can represent another 15 to 25% of construction budgets. You also haven't bought the land yet. Data centers require large parcels with specific characteristics. They need proximity to major fiber routes for connectivity, access to abundant and affordable power, reasonable distance from flood zones, flight paths, and other environmental risks, and ideally access to renewable energy sources as sustainability requirements tighten. In markets where data center demand has exploded, like Northern Virginia, which is the single largest data center market in the world, land prices have escalated dramatically. Areas that were agricultural land a decade ago are now being sold at commercial premium rates because every hyperscaler on the planet wants to build there. The fundamental product of a data center is one of three things, depending on your business model. The first is colocation, where you provide physical space, power, cooling, and connectivity infrastructure, and your customers bring their own servers and equipment. You're essentially a very specialized landlord. You charge by the cabinet, the cage, or the kilowatt. The second is a managed services model, where you go further and operate the infrastructure on behalf of the customer. The third is cloud, which is the hyperscale model where you own both the facility and the compute, and you sell access to processing, storage, and networking capacity by the hour, the gigabyte, or the transaction. For a co-location operator, the economics look like this. Your primary metrics are power utilization and occupancy. A fully leased 10 megawatt co-location facility charging customers an average of $150 to $200 per kilowatt per month generates between $18 and $24 million in annual revenue. Against that, you have debt service on your construction capital, power costs, which are your single largest operating expense, staffing for the 24/7 operations team that keeps the facility running, maintenance contracts, property taxes, and insurance. Electricity typically represents 40 to 50% of total operating expenses. Your power usage effectiveness ratio, the industry standard metric called PUE, measures how efficiently you use power. A PUE of 1.0 would mean every watt going into the building is going directly into computing. In practice, the best modern facilities achieve PUE ratios around 1.1 to 1.2. Meaning 10 to 20% overhead for cooling and infrastructure. Older facilities run 1.5 to 1.8, which is a massive competitive disadvantage when electricity prices rise. After all operating expenses, a well-run colocation facility in a strong market can generate EBITDA margins between 40 and 55%. EBITDA is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. What's left over from operations before the accountants and the lenders take their cut. That sounds exceptional. It's also almost meaningless. Those margins are measured against revenue. The capital it took to build the place never shows up in that number. When you account for the construction cost, the land, and the ongoing capital expenditure to maintain and upgrade the facility, the actual cash-on-cash returns, meaning the annual income generated as a percentage of the cash actually invested, look considerably more modest in the early years. Most new data centers take 5 to 7 years to fully lease up. You're servicing construction debt from day one while revenue builds gradually. The business model that has made data center operators genuinely wealthy is not building and operating a single facility. It's developing a platform and either scaling it aggressively through real estate investment trust structures, or REITs, which are corporate structures that allow real estate companies to pass income directly to investors while avoiding corporate taxation, or selling to larger operators who want the assets. Data center REITs like Equinix and Digital Realty have created enormous shareholder value, precisely because the recurring, long-term contracted nature of data center revenues looks extraordinary to capital markets. Customers who put their equipment in a co-location facility don't leave easily. The cost and disruption of migrating servers, rerouting fiber connections, and re-establishing redundant network paths is so substantial that average customer contract lengths run 3 to 5 years with high renewal rates. That recurring revenue predictability is enormously valuable. But here's the structural tension that sits at the center of this industry right now. The demand for data center capacity has never been higher in history. The AI build-out has created a genuine shortage of available power and ready-to-deploy data center space in major markets. Microsoft announced over $80 billion in data center capital expenditure plans for a recent fiscal year. Amazon, Google, and Meta are spending at similar scales. The pipeline of demand from enterprise customers, cloud providers, and AI companies exceeds the current supply of available capacity in virtually every major market. That sounds like an incredibly favorable environment to be building into. The challenge is that building new capacity requires securing power from utilities, and utilities are operating at the edge of their own infrastructure limits. In Northern Virginia, Dominion Energy has had to impose moratoriums on new large load connections in some areas. In Ireland, the national grid operator has effectively halted new large data center connections in the Dublin area due to capacity constraints. In Texas, ERCOT, which is the Electric Reliability Council of Texas and the organization that manages the state's independent power grid, is managing unprecedented load growth as data centers cluster in the Dallas area. Getting a new facility connected to sufficient grid power can take 3 to 5 years when you factor in utility infrastructure upgrades. That timeline mismatch between customer demand that exists today and power that won't be available for years is the central operational problem of the industry. Operators who secured power capacity and land positions 3 or 4 years ago are sitting on assets of extraordinary strategic value. QTS Realty Trust spent nearly 2 decades building exactly that position: land banked ahead of demand, power contracts locked in early. In 2021, before the AI boom had even started, Blackstone bought the company for close to $10 billion, betting on the power and land positions QTS had already secured. new entrants face a difficult path. The lead times for high-voltage transformers, critical electrical infrastructure components, have stretched to 2 years or more due to global supply chain constraints. The specialized construction labor to build a data center, the electricians, mechanical engineers, and low-voltage technicians who can work at this scale, is in short supply across every major market simultaneously. There's a second layer of risk that deserves serious attention, and it's the technological one. Data centers are not neutral infrastructure in the way a warehouse or an office building is. They are built around specific power densities, cooling architectures, and floor load specifications. A facility designed 5 years ago for average rack densities of 8 to 12 kilowatts per rack may be structurally and mechanically incapable of supporting the 50 to 100 plus kilowatt densities that modern AI workloads require. An obsolete data center isn't worth nothing, but its value trajectory relative to a modern facility moves in the wrong direction quickly. The capital required to retrofit an older facility for high-density AI workloads can approach the cost of new construction, while leaving you with inferior specifications. This creates a technology timing risk that sophisticated investors think about carefully. You're deploying capital today into physical infrastructure with a 20 to 30-year useful life, but the workloads driving demand today could look completely different in 10 years. The data center industry has navigated technology transitions before, from mainframes to client-server architectures, from on-premise enterprise computing to cloud. Each transition reshaped who won and who lost among facility operators. The current AI wave is driving investment at a scale that dwarfs anything that came before it. Whether the specific infrastructure being built today to serve that wave remains optimally positioned a decade from now is a genuine question, not a rhetorical one. Then there's the water question. Modern data centers, particularly those using evaporative cooling towers, consume significant quantities of water. A large hyperscale campus can use millions of gallons of water daily. As data centers cluster in specific geographies, local water authorities and regulators are beginning to scrutinize this consumption. Some municipalities are requiring water usage disclosures and limiting new development based on water availability. This is an emerging regulatory risk that wasn't part of the conversation 5 years ago and is increasingly part of the conversation today. At the top of the market, the hyperscalers build and own most of their own facilities. Amazon Web Services, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud are their own largest customers and have the capital, procurement scale, and engineering depth to build infrastructure at costs that third-party operators cannot match. They also represent the largest potential customers for wholesale colocation operators who can offer ready capacity faster than the hyperscalers can build it themselves. The middle market is dominated by a handful of large colocation operators who have built national and global platforms. Below them is a fragmented range of regional operators, many of whom are being acquired at premium valuations by private equity firms and infrastructure funds who recognize that data center assets with long-term contracted revenue and essential service characteristics look very attractive relative to other infrastructure investments. The economics at the small end of the market are genuinely difficult. A single small facility operator competing for enterprise colocation customers against a national platform with superior connectivity options, deeper financial resources, and more robust redundancy certifications is fighting from a structural disadvantage. The customers who need colocation most, financial services firms, healthcare organizations, and government entities, typically require Tier 3 or Tier 4 certification, industry standards that specify how much redundancy a facility must have, with Tier 4 being the highest level, meaning the building can survive any single component failure without going offline. Building to those standards costs significantly more. Competing on anything other than price in those segments without scale is a challenge that drives consolidation. The power cost structure also creates a competitive moat for large operators. A company buying power at scale under long-term utility agreements and investing in on-site renewable generation has a meaningfully lower cost structure than a small operator buying retail power at variable rates. As sustainability requirements tighten and customers increasingly require their data center partners to demonstrate green power credentials, the operators who locked in renewable power purchase agreements early hold a genuine competitive advantage. A well-capitalized developer who identifies a strong market, secures land and power ahead of demand, builds to institutional quality specifications, and leases to creditworthy tenants on long-term contracts can generate stabilized yields of 8 to 12% on total invested capital once a facility reaches full occupancy. In a market where comparable real estate assets yield 4 to 6%, that premium reflects the additional complexity, the power infrastructure investment, and the specialized operational requirements of running the facility. The operators who have built platforms of scale, like Equinix, which operates over 260 facilities globally, have generated returns over multi-decade periods that rival or exceed the best industrial real estate portfolios in history. The servers never stop running, the power bills never stop coming, and the companies that figured out the economics of this business before everyone else paid attention are the ones collecting the rent.